appreciate first the mic of the system itself. So, thank you very much, Mr. Nalkar, for hearing the session, and thanks to Professor Lim for inviting me for this particular session. Well, I will do a modest attempt to do a throwing some light on the linkages between foreign policy and India's internal security. I am very sure that by the time I finish my talk with you, you will have more questions from my talk than the answers that I will provide you. Well, I have been debating, in fact, for the last few days what I should speak. Then I thought that let me start speaking with my experience and what I have read. Not a very structured lecture or talk. Well, so far as India's foreign policy is concerned, I think it's a very complex area. It's a foreign policy as such gets dictated by so many factors in a nation. It will be the systemic issues within the country as such, national issues, and then above all the personality of the people who are managing the foreign policy. So, if we go back to the independent India in the beginning, it was Nehru who was the one who formulated, and his personal imprint you can find in the policy which was followed in the beginning of our nation. Now, he was following the policy of non-aligned movement. India was trying to be away from the bipolar world that time, that is the Soviet Union and the US. But it didn't last long. I think the first phase of India's foreign policy you can take from independence to 1952 when we had the Chinese aggressor. And that gave a jolt to the India's foreign policy makers. Now, having introduced the Indian foreign policy in the independent India in the beginning, let us go back to the internal security scenario. Now, internal security as such is very much, if you see the Constitution of India, it is contained in that also. If you see carefully, the people who made the Constitution, they made three lists of distribution of power or various aspects of the national functions. Now, the police and the law and order was kept in the state list. Now, if you go a little deeper into that, that will give you the idea of the thought process that the Constituent Assembly had at that time. That means the law and order and police was supposed to be absolutely an internal issue. When I say internal issue, more so a local issue. So that's why a state we are supposed to be managing and looking into that. Of course, there was also a balance of power tried to be put between the federal and the state structure as such. But if you see closely, these are not in the concurrent list. And if you see the historically also, perhaps there was no internal disturbance expected at that time, not only in India, anywhere, which was not local. Now, foreign policy is always outward looking. Internal disturbance is something which is within the nation. Now, let's go into the foreign policy area again. Now, we find that after the China's aggression, there was a change in the Indian foreign policy outlook. Now, till the collapse of Soviet Union, you will find that India's foreign policy is more inclined towards the Soviets. It's as simple as that during the war with Pakistan, Soviets were more helpful to India, and Americans left this subcontinent since they were more busy with their own internal issues as well as their problems in Vietnam. So you find that at one side, US has showed less interest in this particular subcontinent. And India finds a helping hand coming from the Soviet Union. So from 1962 till the collapse of Soviet Union, you find that the Indian foreign policy is highly inclined towards the Soviet side. All the purchase, most of the purchase for our defense, etc., they were from Soviet bloc as such. Now, at the same time, in the internal security scenario, you will start seeing emergence of terrorism. Now, in the beginning, India, of course, had the militant stages coming up, of course. Immediately after the independence also, the problem in Kashmir, whatever was there, that was, you can take it as an internal disturbance only. But it was fueled from across the border. It was not internal actually. It was coming from across the border. Every decade has seen one or other big upheaval for the Indian internal security scenario. You had the Naga problems coming up in Northeast. Then we had the Punjab issue, wherein it was again, though the issue was that of Sikhs or whatever, but then we all know, the world knows that it was fueled from across the border. So we are seeing that, well, the problems are internal, but they are being fueled from across the borders. Now, this is how 1960s starts, 70s, 80s, and then you find that from 1980s onward, the terrorism issue starts becoming more and more important, more so for India. Now, I think the 1999 December, if you get back into the history, when the hijack of Indian Airlines plane was there, it was very clear that Pakistani sponsored or supported people were behind the whole issue. And India started feeling the pinch of the terrorism in a big way. On the other side, now after the collapse of Soviet Union, India was of course having a dilemma which way to go, since then there was only one superpower existing in the world, that is the US. We had our own problems of nuclear capacity building, etc. And then you find that gradually we exploded our own nuclear device. There were sanctions, but anyhow, India was capable enough or worthy enough to finally get the civil nuclear deal struck with the US. So US is becoming a closer partner with India on the foreign policy front. Now, on the internal security scenario, you are finding that from 1990 onwards, terrorism is becoming a bigger issue. Now, 2000, jihadi terrorism, which is very much, it is very much baked across the border and brought into this country. Now, foreign policy of any country has to cater for the prosperity of the country. I mean, finally, any policy that the country is having, at the end of it, what is the crux of that? The peace and prosperity in the country. Now, you must have seen after the French problem, the French president has said that there is no prosperity without security. Now the world is recognizing, and the foreign policy of any nation is oriented towards the peace and prosperity. Of course, prosperity will come in various ways. The economic security, the energy security, all those things are also combined with that. Now again you go back to India's geographical location. Now you find that India is having land and maritime boundaries with 8 nations. Now, except for Bhutan and China, which are peaceful. Other neighbors of India, they themselves have got their own serious internal disturbances, problems. Whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is Myanmar, whether it is Sri Lanka, even Maldives also of late have been getting into situations. Now, foreign policy of India has to look into all these factors, all these national issues of our neighbors also, since their foreign policy will depend upon whatever is happening in their country as such. So I am bringing to a point wherein now we see how foreign policy is complex, and with the time, the national interest, the systemic issues which are there, and with the personality of the people who manage that. And that example you saw a few days back when Obama was in India, how the personality of the individual who is at the helm of the affair, it has got effect on the foreign policy of the nation as such. Now, the point is there that we have come to a level in 2000 and thereafter wherein the internal disturbances in India is externally driven. Now, they are not internally driven. There are smaller issues, but we are talking about terrorism and nationalism, which are the two major problems which India is facing right now. Now terrorism, if you see, is it only common, it's for India? No. Many countries across the world are suffering from this problem. So accordingly, the foreign policy of most of these nations are also oriented towards containing that particular issue as such. So the foreign policy of any nation has been or has to be dynamic. And if you see the internal disturbances in India, you find that of late, it is all externally driven. Now, there you get the linkage between the foreign policy of the nation and the internal disturbance. It was not so when the constitution was framed. Otherwise, the makers of constitutions who were the most enlightened people of the nation at that time, they would not have kept the police and law and order into the state subject alone. Now the issue also comes that are we able to put our policies? Foreign policy, it is easy to change, but internal disturbance, the policy, the laws, the regulations, the system which takes care of the internal security, is it capable? Is it sufficient? It may have been sufficient at a time when it was framed, but is it sufficient now? So we get to the question that whether we have been able to mold our policies in such a way that we are able to contain the various problems which are arising out of these externally driven internal security issues. So the time has come for gathering like this to think, to debate. A nation is made up by its people. The country is run by the individuals who are selected by the people of the citizens of the country. We have to be aware, and the intellectual gatherings like this, the discussion has to be there, that the days ahead, are they going to be tougher than what we have been seeing? Now, on the foreign policy front, you see, in the last, maybe in a class book scenario, Indian foreign policy is taken to be divided into, till now, 3 portions. One is still China's war, 1962 from independence, 1962 till 91-92, the collapse of Soviet Union, and thereafter this. But then I feel that from 2014 onward, the 4th stage of India's foreign policy has started, which is a very aggressive partnership with the US. And no partnership is without interest. In the field of foreign policy, there are no friends. It's on interest based. What serves you, if it serves the other also, then you are friends. Terrorism is one issue which is binding. In addition to the economic aspects, India is expected or is one of the world's biggest markets. The largest population of middle class, about 300 to 400 million people are here with the buying power to speak English and ready to consume the product which is being made in the West. In addition to all this, yes, terrorism also is one issue on which the two countries are looking together to contain that and to fight that. So, I hope I have been able to put some linkage between the foreign policy and India's internal security, as the seminar was designed to take up this topic. And I am very happy that a topic like this was taken, since still the appreciation towards the externally driven internal security issues is not as much as it should be or as it is there in the other nations. If you take US itself, after the 9/11, what they did? They created the whole Department of Homeland Security. It is the largest department which the US has got. Within a span of 1 year they created. They brought NCTC, they brought the intelligence, head of the intelligence of secretary, a post was created. There were so many, NCTC was created, so many things were created. And in a very systematic fashion. In India also, yes, there is no doubt that we have been taking steps. There has been, the NIA has been created. MAC is there now working in most of the, not most all the states as such. But a comprehensive policy on this particular issue perhaps is still not there. And perhaps still more debate has to be there in this regard. Thank you.